Alright, welcome back to more A-level history, and what is probably going to be one of the last streams on history. We of course have the exam in, 3 days now, so not long now to revise. I want to go over today 3 out of 5 of the case studies that we're supposed to know. So I want to go over Lancashire, Bamberg, and Salem, because I feel like out of all of the case studies, these are the ones that get very much overlooked. I mean, East Anglia is easy enough, that's things like Hopkins, the context of the Civil War, traditional authority breaking down, economic factors, basic things like that. North Berwick witch hunt, you can link that to the role of King James, the role of torture, the lack of government. You could link it to the case of Julie Duncan and David Seaton, things like that. The others are a bit all over the place, and that's what I want to go over. So we're going to start off with Salem, because Salem is arguably the most weird one out of all of them. And I'm hoping that if you guys watch this, or just kind of skip about, I'm hoping this will be helpful for you guys as well. I'll just put this on in the background and Okay, causes of the hunt. So I'm going to break this down into 2 sections. Causes of the hunt and the reasons why the hunt ended. So we're going to start off with Salem. And this is the context. And all the information I'm getting from the mark schemes. So this is definitive information. This isn't information that I've got from, some random ass dodgy page. This is literally the mark scheme content. So this is things they want you to talk about. So we're going to start off first with Indian attacks. And again, I'm going to just kind of do this like a bit of a mind map, really. The context of the Indian attacks, what you need to know is there was a real concern about Indian attacks on the main frontier and a deep pessimism about the future of the colony, which added to the severity of the trials. Now, what that means, in regular terms, is we're looking at the context of the hunts. We need to link every factor to why the trials got as bad as they did. And obviously that's an immediate one. The nature of the Indian attacks led to obviously people fearing for their lives, the colony's lives, therefore adding to the severity of the trials. So that's pretty much just restating what I've wrote there. The need for Governor Phipps to deal with the Indian attacks on the main frontier meant his absence from Salem allowed for witch hunts to increase in quantity and severity. There's that word again, severity of the trials. And this is linking to Governor Phipps. Now this Governor Phipps is an important character for ending the hunts, but we can obviously link him right away to causing them. The absence of him. So the absence of authority. So already, if you were asked a question saying, the nature of Indian attacks was the most significant reason for increasing the severity of the Salem trials, you could say, yeah, absolutely. Indian attacks led to fear, increasing the intensity of the hunts. The absence of Governor Phipps to deal with the Indian attacks led to an increase in quantity. Always link it to the question. So Indian attacks led to increasing severity. Absence of Governor Phipps led to an increase in the quantity. Okay. The next person that we need to know a lot about is Cotton Mather. Now, the mark scheme does not talk much about him, but he is a crucial piece of the puzzle. Crucial piece of the puzzle. The role of Cotton Mather in popularising European models of witch hunting, where witches were believed to act in covens, a belief which increased the number of people accused. So, right away, I keep on changing the colour of pen, don't I? The idea with Cotton Mather is he popularised European hunting methods / beliefs. That's a big one. That is a massive factor. It might not look like it, but that is a gigantic factor. He's popularising the idea that witches work in covens. Obviously, the idea of it being covens, groups of witches, is going to increase the number of accused. Also, the relationship between Cotton Mather and his father, Increase Mather, that's all the mark scheme says. So I don't know what their relationship was like. I might have to look into that. And Cotton Mather's earlier writings, particularly memorable provenances regarding witchcraft and possessions. Okay, so I don't know what that means, but what I know is he wrote the book, memorable provenances of what the fuck is this name? Relating to witchcraft. So he wrote this book, Memorable Provenances Relating to Witchcraft. And I'm assuming that obviously the context of that is that it supported, it supported the increase in hunting. I guess you could even link it to that there, but it popularised certain hunting methods and beliefs. The next thing, and arguably the biggest, or one of the biggest, is the role of children. So, children. The perceived bewitching of children promoted the investigations into witchcraft at Salem. So that's the context. The context you would write about is that the children were believed to be possessed, which led to an investigation, which obviously spiraled into the hunts. That's the context. Children were used as witnesses at trials, and their evidence was believed. For example, their actions and performances in court. So, this should ring a bell if you're obviously in my class. This should ring a bell. The idea that children would act hysterical in court, they would put on acts, making it look like they were possessed. So, it was literally that their evidence, children's evidence, was believed. Also, when they were too young to testify, the accusations of the children were endorsed by adults, which added weight to evidence. That is a huge one. The idea that adults would tell the children, or would speak for them, speak for the children. To add to this, there's even more. Families used children to accuse their enemies. For example, Anne Putman provided with names by her parents. So adults would use the nature of children in these hunts to accuse their enemies. Finally, the role of children either as hysterics or as enjoying celebrity status. That's an obvious one. The children would act hysterical, but it's perhaps implied that some of them enjoyed the kind of notoriety that came from being possessed. So it's this idea that children added to the fire by being hysterical and kind of playing into it. Okay, just a small one, general context. Right, my neighbours are blasting music, that's fun. Fuck off. The role of Tituba as a catalyst for the witch hunts. That's just a generic one, but Tituba was I think a slave, and she kind of is important later in ending the hunts, because you can talk about how it started with Tituba, who was a slave, and eventually the people accused became more and more significant people, including the governor's wife, eventually. So, the context of her. Also, the context that the witch hunts were supported by spectral evidence. I don't recall what exactly spectral evidence is. I think what it did mainly was it just enabled people to lie, because it was so strongly believed by Buzz, especially by people like, I think, Governor Phipps, or I think Paris. Was it Samuel Paris? I know one of the guys that kind of initiated the hunts strongly believed in spectral evidence, which made it easier to accuse. So again, always link to the question. Idea of spectral evidence made it easier to accuse. Cotton Mather's book popularized European hunting methods, which increased the number of accused. Children, their evidence was believed, which made it easier for the accused to actually be punished. The adults would accuse their enemies, which led to increased number of people accused. It's the same thing that you're repeating for every point. Another mini point is the revolution. Now, all the Marx scheme says for this is the revolution in England had produced a political vacuum with no governor till May. When a new one arrived, the political vacuum allowed the trials to continue. So it created a power vacuum due to no governor. Therefore, allowing trials to continue. That's a key point with a lot of the witch hunts. The idea that there was an absence of authority which enabled the trials to happen. In Bamberg, it's obviously Dornheim, who, because of a lack of traditional authority, he's able to get away with accusing people. In the context of Salem, it's the lack of authority due to the revolution, which leads to an increase in the trials, because there's a power vacuum. The final thing are social tensions. So, social tensions. Social tensions within the community, often associated with land disputes and inheritance, created an environment that was well suited to a witch hunt. So, land disputes / inheritance. That's all you can really put for that, I think. The idea that there were literally personal feuds due to, petty land disputes, inheritance. It created an environment where people would be finger blaming because of the high tensions. So high social tensions created a perfect environment, and that's a great word to use, created a perfect environment for witch accusations. Tensions existed between traditionalists and progressives, resulting from the establishment of a new church in Salem and appointment of Reverend Samuel Paris, who promoted witch hunting. So that's a person. Samuel Harris. He was part of a new church, and he promoted hunting. The Puritan theocracy that was followed in Salem promoted a belief that Eve had set a pre-decent where women were easily tempted by the devil, a belief which underpinned accusations made. Okay, so that links to religion. The idea that the Puritan belief, remember all these guys are Puritan, the Puritan belief that Eve had been tempted by, I don't fucking know, the devil, which means that all women are easily, gullible? I don't know what the word would be. Easily tempted. And obviously the idea that witches work for the devil. Okay. Social tension existed between the town and the village, where jealousies and tensions between families drove accusations. So yes, Salem, there was the town and the village. And in both of these, there were tensions over things like land. Jealousies and tensions. Okay. Let's summarize everything that I've literally just said. Okay. So, the context. This is all of the context of the Salem witch trials. We'll start off with the general context. The general context was spectral evidence was well believed. That made it easier to accuse witches because this is spectral evidence. You can literally lie and it will get believed, making it easier to accuse. Another bit of context, the Indian attacks. Obviously, the Indian attacks are going to make people, fear for their lives, but also fear for the colony's lives. Because of that, it's going to increase the severity of the hunt. I mean, when everyone's panicking, it's going to be a lot easier to pick on people. Also linking to Indian attacks is the absence of authority. Governor Phipps, obviously a governor high up in authority, he was absent for a lot of the trials because of the Indian attacks. He had to go off and, deal with them. So, that led to the trials being able to happen more because of his absence. So, if you were to now get a question on Salem, that would be a lovely paragraph. This would be a lovely paragraph to write about, the context of the Indian attacks. The next thing you want to talk about is the English Revolution. This led to a power vacuum where for a long period of time there was no governor. That meant that the trials could continue for a lot longer until there was a governor. So again, you don't need to know fuck all about what the English Revolution was. I don't. But you just need to know that it led to a power vacuum. And again, even if you don't know what that means, just link it to the question. It allowed the trials to continue. It increased the quantity of the trials. It increased the severity. Link it to the question and you will be fine. You can ramble about literally anything I have wrote here, and as long as you link it to the question, you will be fine. Example, the role of children. Children were believed to be possessed, which led to an investigation, obviously sparking the trials. Children's evidence was believed, so when they would act hysterical in court, it was believed. When children couldn't testify, adults would speak for them, which made it easier for adults to feed children names of their enemies, obviously, because that was a thing that they did, which made, the trials increase in severity. Not only are you having children, pretending to be possessed, which is making people panic, but people are accusing each other. So again, you could write a lovely paragraph about the role of children. You could write a lovely paragraph about that. Even if you don't remember half of this, just link it to the question. The question is going to be about either why the hunt ended or why the hunt started. Why the hunt started, children, Indian attacks, Cotton Mather, social tensions. You can ramble. Also, you could link the starting of the hunt to religion. The idea that Eve was tempted by the devil, which makes women overall seem to be easily, tricked by the devil. Then we move on to Cotton Mather. He popularized beliefs about witches. For example, the fact that witches worked in covens. Obviously, the consequence of that is more witches are going to be accused. He also wrote a book with a very long title that I'm not going to say. And I guess you could... I don't know what the book is. I don't remember. But you could still link it to the question. You could say that the book was influential in increasing the number of accused. And finally, social tensions. There were social tensions between the town of Salem and the village of Salem. And there were also social tensions in terms of land disputes and inheritance. This created an environment where people were more likely to accuse each other. If you fucking hate someone who's taken your land, you're gonna accuse them because you're a selfish prick. And finally, the role of Samuel Harris, he was part of a brand new church which promoted witch hunting. So. If none of what I just said made any sense, I will make it even easier. Okay. So the context. The context of the Salem hunts. We have Indian attacks, Cotton Mather, the role of children, the general context, so that's going to be religious factors, and obviously the idea of spectral evidence, social tensions, and obviously the revolution. So, this is everything to do with the context of Salem. The Indian attacks, Cotton Mather, children, the overall religious context, social tensions, and the English Revolution. If you were asked an essay, which says, let's come up with an essay type. If it says, Cotton Mather was the most influential reason for starting the Salem witch hunts. Easy. You write about him, and you link every one of your points to starting the hunts. Then you just pick any one of these and write another paragraph on. I would say the easiest one would be children. Then you pick another one. Social tensions. Boom. You have an essay. And you can apply that anywhere. If you got asked, if the question said, children were the most significant reason for the starting of the witch hunts, you would say yeah. And then you would pick another two to argue. You would say, actually no, it was the religious context. Actually no, it was Indian attacks. It's the same formula. As long as you know one or two little points for each one of these, you'll be fine. Indian attacks. It led to an absence of the governor. Why would that be important? Obviously, you can talk about that. The Indian attacks also just created a climate of high tension, which made it easier for the trials to increase. Cotton Mather, he popularized certain beliefs about witches working in covens. Obviously, explain what that means. Cotton Mather also wrote his book. You could argue, I don't know what the book did. I have no interest in knowing what his book said, but you could just ramble about that. The role of children, obviously the idea that adults would use the children, it would be easier to accuse enemies, things like that, but also just that children were believed, because it was the children's possessions that started the hunts. Then obviously move on to the context, the religious context, the idea that it was a Puritan, colony. They believed that, women were easily manipulated by the devil. They also believed in spectral evidence. Social tensions, you could talk about Samuel Parris. You could talk about the general social tensions of inheritance, of people, finger pointing because of that. And finally, the revolution, which obviously led to no governor for a while, a power vacuum. So there you go. In 25 minutes, I've gone over probably 4 hours worth of lessons. Now let's go over why the hunts ended. So, there are literally 3 reasons why the hunts ended. 3 reasons why the Salem witch hunts ended. Number 1 is Governor Phipps. I told you he'd be important. Number 2 is the overall nature of the trials. And number 3 is Increase Mather. I love his name. It's like, why is he called Increase? That's like being called Subtraction. Like, it makes no sense. It's such a stupid name. Anyways, Governor Phipps, he dissolved the court of Oyer and Termina, which was replaced with a superior court of justice. The superior court did not allow spectral evidence, which had been used against most of those previously accused. Right, let's sum that up. Literally, it's that he made a superior court, and this superior court rejects spectral evidence. That's it. That's literally it. Obviously, then you can yap about that. Why would rejecting spectral evidence be important? Because spectral evidence was a key point of evidence for every one of those accused. If they're rejecting it, it makes it harder to accuse people. Phipps believed that the court were making mistakes. This was also a view shared by Increase Mather, so you could link the two there. Say that, changing kind of views. Phipps banned witchcraft books, which had an influence both on the nature of accusations and proceedings of the trials. So he banned books. Particularly, books which changed people's beliefs about books that influenced the nature of accusations and proceedings of the trials. So if a book is telling you, if you're possessed by a witch, you're gonna shake around, people would then literally do that. So he banned books which led to people doing things like that. Bro, my head is going. That's why I'm half rambling right now. Ouch. The status of those accused increased. Okay, this is the biggest one. Tituba was a slave who was accused. It went from Tituba all the way up to Phipps's own wife. The governor's wife was accused of a witch. So, he probably wanted to end the hunt because of a social reason as well. He had a personal reason. If your wife is literally being accused and you know it's a load of shit, you are going to want to end the trials for your own selfish reason. So, that is Governor Phipps and his role. He replaced the court with a superior court, but rejected evidence. He believed the court were making mistakes. He banned books that fueled people's ideas of what possessions were, how to accuse witches, and how to trial witches. And Phipps's own wife was accused, which meant he had a personal reason to end the hunts as well. Now the overall nature of the trials. Many people stopped hunting for witches, owing to the extent of trials and the loss of friends and family. So that's just a general one. It says here, 200 were accused, 20 were killed. So that is massive. If 20 people you know have been killed, you're going to want to stop accusing people. Doubts grew over the quality of evidence given in court, particularly spectral evidence, which was considered to not be practical enough to prove someone a witch. So again, linking to spectral evidence no longer being believed. It was no longer believed. It was doubted. It was not valid enough to point someone as being a witch. Witch hunting was not common in New England, and the extent of the witch trials was unusual, which meant there were external pressures to bring the trials to an end. So literally, the idea that this trial, the witch trials, grew way too big. They were way too big. They were not common at all in America at this point. The fact that they were still going on meant other people from outside wanted them to stop too. Public confidence in the legality and legitimacy of the trials declined as the numbers of those accused increased. So literally, more people were accused, which led to more people no longer trusting. Because it's fine to accuse one or two, but if you accuse hundreds, then it's going to make your case a lot more doubtable. Finally is Reverend Increase Mather. He was significant in bringing about an end to the trials. He held sermons that demanded caution in making accusations. So he held sermons, and these literally demanded people to be cautious of accusing people. And you could link that to Governor Phipps, who believed the courts were making mistakes. So did Increase. He also believed the courts were making mistakes. So, that is why the Salem hunts ended. So, reasons... My hair is such a mess. Reasons why the Salem hunt started. We have, obviously, Cotton Mather. He made it... He kind of popularised the idea that witches worked in covens, leading to people wanting to accuse more. It was the lack of authority due to the revolution. It led to a power vacuum. Also the idea... Man, it's difficult to think of these off the top of my head. I should be writing these down. Also, obviously, the governor having to deal with Indian attacks meant that the trials went on for way too long. Also, the role of children, that's a very important one. The religious context of, obviously, women, Puritans, Samuel Parris and the new church. And finally, social tensions, the idea of land disputes, inheritance. Jesus Christ. Oh my god. I've just spent 40 minutes just talking to a wall. Oh my god, I'm so tired. We'll do Lancashire next. Lancashire doesn't have an ending, which is odd. Lancashire has no ending. Yes, absolutely it had to have ended, but Lancashire, at least in the spec that I'm looking at, in terms of the mark schemes I'm looking at, the mark scheme does not have anything interesting, in terms of why it ended. The only thing we know about Lancashire is how it started. And for that I have 2 pages. First is economic factors. Big reason why these trials started. Economic factors. Bro, my neighbours could not be playing any more obnoxious music. The suspects were accused of harming cattle, demonstrating the importance of livestock to the economy of Pendle, and the accusations were linked to economic issues. Okay, easy. That's a really interesting one. It says here, Old Shattuck's was accused of bewitching a cattle. So it's this idea that cattle was an important, I guess, point of industry, if you could call it that. An important part of Bamberg's, it's not Bamberg, it's Lancashire. An important part of Lancashire's economy. So if cattle mysteriously died, you're obviously going to be like, oh shit, I'm poor now, let's accuse some women because they did it. The region experienced inflation and rents had increased 39%. So, rents, inflation. Things like that. The highest instances were experienced by subtenants, which a number of those accused were. So if you couldn't pay rent, some greedy fucking landlord is going to say, hey, you're a witch, give me my money. There was an increase in enclosures in this period. For those who don't know, enclosures is literally like you're getting land which anyone can use, you're making it private, so you can't go on there, you can't hunt, you can't take materials. Basically being a greedy fucking cunt. The number of enclosures obviously led to economic tension. It created a climate of distrust. So it's led to distrust. Population growth put further pressure on resources and increased poverty in the region. This tension encouraged a climate for a witch hunt. So again, tension. Due to population growth. Finally, accusations stemmed from the events which followed Alison Davis's incident of begging. Yikes. Begging. So, if you were asked a question saying, the nature of the Lancashire hunt was mainly economic, how far do you agree? This would be your first paragraph, right there, first paragraph. You would say, yes, the nature of the hunts was due to a climate of distrust. This distrust stemmed from economic tension. Talk about the increase in rents, the increase in inflation. Population growth led to tension. Enclosures led to tension. The nature of the accusations, the fact many witches were accused of killing cattle, suggesting cattle was important to the economy. And of course, Alison Davis was literally begging, and that's why she was so easily accused, because she was poor. Not much of this left. But Witchcraft Acts. Witchcraft Acts. The publication of Demonology and the Witchcraft Act of 1604 legislated the conjuring spirit was a capital offence. This gave the public a reason to fight witches and led to an increase in accusations. So, it made conjuring spirits a capital offence. Obviously, it would give the public a reason to then fight. Gave the public a reason to hunt for witches, because it was a crime. That's a serious mega crime, innit? The 1604 Act was harsher than the Elizabethan Act, stated that the conjuring of spirits or exhuming corpses was a capital crime. The Act encouraged communities to hunt for witches by drawing attention to the phenomenon. And the Lancashire hunt was a response to this. So literally, a direct reason Lancashire occurred is as a direct response to the Act, which encouraged communities to hunt witches. The Act encouraged communities to hunt. The king was head of the judiciary, and the judges, Altham and Bromley, may have wanted to reflect the king's attitude to witchcraft. This was the same for Noel. So Roger Noel, which is also my granddad's last name, just spelled differently, Noel reflected the king's attitude. Remember, it's King James, I think, at this point. King James, or whoever it was obviously very anti-Catholic. Was he anti-Catholic, or was it the anti-other? Yeah, anti-Catholic, I think. So obviously Noel is going to oppose Catholics because it reflects the king's best interests. The demonic pact formed part of English law for the first time. So this idea of the diabolical pact with the devil was shaped by this law. Without this law, it would not have been commonplace to say that witches had a pact with the devil. Next is Roger Noel. The ambitions and zeal of the local magistrate Roger Noel drove the witch hunt and were crucial in the accusations. So literally, he was very zealous about it. He wanted to impress the king. He wanted to get an audience with many people. Therefore, he's going to want to carry this out. Noel's actions, following Alison Davis's confession, ensured that the witch hunt became more widespread. Noel acted on rumours of meeting at Malkin Tower. So he acted on rumours, which kick-started off the hunt again. It restarted the hunt. He's acting purely on rumours that, there's a conspiracy in the tower. Noel had strongly believed in the dangers of recusancy. I think recusants are people that abandon their faith. This had an influence upon those he chose to question. He questioned a Catholic widow. Because the king hates Catholics, he's going to want to accuse Catholics to impress the king. Although Noel could have tried the accused women himself, he chose to send the detained to the assize court. That obviously increased the profile of the cases. Instead of dealing with it himself, he is literally going out of his way to make sure this case gets a big reputation. 11 people were detained as a result. So, rivalry. Local rivalry and accusations led to the Lancashire witch hunts. 6 of the 11 witches on trial were from 2 rival families who experienced poverty and were headed by widows, the Shattocks and Demdike family. Local rivalry, if over half of them are literally from 2 opposing families, then that heavily suggests that it was local tension that led to the hunts. And finally, religion and superstition. Pendle had a number of Puritan gentry in the area. One family whose members were accused, the Nutters, were Catholic. So again, this idea of Puritanism. Noel is going to want to accuse Catholics because it goes against the king. If there are Puritans in the area, Puritan gentry, the upper class, then obviously they are going to want to oppose Catholics. Religious tensions, rather than the statute, were central to central accusations. 3 of the accused women were able to convince the judge that they were victims of a Catholic plot and were let off. So again, this idea of opposing Catholics. If 3 women are saying, we've been falsely accused, this is the Catholics doing, they fucking hate Catholics, they're gonna believe you. Some of the accused, example, Old Demdike, was said to be involved in white magic as well as evil magic. So there was a strong local belief in magic and witchcraft, which created a perfect climate. So, I would argue Lancashire is the easiest one. I would argue it's literally the easiest one by far. Literally, the context you need to know is economic factors. You have an increase in rent, an increase in inflation, an increase in enclosure. This fueled a climate of distrust and created an environment of economic tension, further increased by the population growth in Lancashire. Obviously, the nature of those accused is that many of it was economic, obviously cattle, obviously the witchcraft legislation, the impact of Roger Noel, Catholics. I think that that's it. So I have just gone through Lancashire, I've just gone through Salem. I'm going to save Bamberg because we've already gone over that on stream. And in fact, that now means I've gone over every single one of these on stream. I've now gone over every single one of these on stream. What I'm going to spend the rest of the night doing now is going over the rest by myself. And then tomorrow, or on Wednesday, I will go and talk to Bobby. And hopefully we were able to revise the rest. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.